Welcome, Gunrunner.
The glory days of the video game arcade might be a long way behind us, sadly, but they certainly haven't been forgotten. In this video I'm going to take you back over 30 years to those heady days that played such an important part in our youth. The year is 1990 and we're all present at one of the greatest times in coin-op video game history. You won't find any fruit machines, penny pushers or fixed prize machines here. These are the true arcade classics that lit up dingy smoke-filled rooms, sat on stained carpets, whilst they delighted audiences and drained people's pockets of all their spare change. Names like Sega, Atari, Konami, Taito and Capcom have become synonymous with gaming, and so it will be no surprise to see them feature heavily in this video. This is where many of today's popular franchises started, multiple innovations took place, and the genres that we know and love today were formed. All these titles play every bit as well today as they did back then, and deserve to be remembered as true classics in the annals of video game history. One very interesting thing about this year in particular was that we saw 5 hugely popular puzzle games make their debuts in the arcades. Whilst 2 of them do make this list, 3 others in the form of Dr. Mario, Pipe Mania and Tetris don't, because these were all very well known on home systems before becoming coin-ops, but are still very much worth checking out in this form too. With that out the way, let's get on with the show. When you hear the name Toeplan, you immediately think of shoot 'em ups and titles like Flying Shark, Hellfire and Truxton. So this quirky and original platform game often gets forgotten about, and that's a real shame because Snow Brothers is right up there with the very best. You and a friend take on the parts of Nick and Tom, the Snow Brothers, as you run around the single screens turning enemies into big balls of ice, collecting the power-ups and defeating the huge bosses. Like the other puzzle games I mentioned in the intro, Columns also originated in the home as an obscured public domain game for the Atari ST and Apple Mac. But it was Sega who made the game famous when they purchased the rights and released it into the arcades as well as their own home systems. It was actually intended to be their own sequel to the Japanese Tetris arcade game, but that's a whole nother story that's very much worth exploring, so click the link in the top right hand corner if you want to learn more about it. Double Dragon 3 The Rosetta Stone was the final game in the original arcade trilogy, and very much seemed to split opinion. With it, Technos tried to update the series to match more advanced scrolling beat-em-ups like Final Fight and Streets of Rage, but definitely lost some of the magic in the process. We have more realistic graphics, a power-up system, shops, new characters and a much more developed plot, but it just doesn't play as well as the previous 2 games, sadly. Subtitled All-American Police Car Race, Cisco Heat is a fantastic advancement of games like Chase HQ and SCI, where you choose between one of 2 different cop cars and then speed through the streets of San Francisco. But whereas the aforementioned Taito games saw you catching criminals, in this one you're actually trying to beat other cops to the finish line. What makes this more interesting than similar racing games of the time is where you have to negotiate the different streets by making sharp turns when prompted. We all remember Roadblasters, right? It was a hugely popular coin-op for Atari that even spawned a range of toys by Matchbox. Hoping to recreate some of that success, they took the tried and tested design of the game and transferred it to the water. So now you're a courier delivering top secret parcels using the world's great rivers in your highly advanced speedboat. The story might be different, but the gameplay is very similar, as you blast away the criminals trying to stop you and collect the useful items in your path. From one game that copied a tried and tested formula to another in the form of Sega's Alien Storm. This one borrowed quite heavily from another Sega coin-op classic in the form of Golden Axe. But joining the familiar scrolling beat-em-up stages are some quite unique Operation Wolf style sections, where you get to destroy everything you see. The B-movie themes of Alien Storm are a welcome departure from similar games of the time, and the great art really brings the title to life. At a time when most people believed that Laserdisc games were a relic of the 80s, American Laser Games brought technology back to life with a series of fantastic shooting games that also included titles like Space Pirates, Crime Patrol and Who Shot Johnny Rock. Whilst the action was actually quite limited, the movie quality visuals and audio brought the game to life and really made you feel like an all-American cowboy. There was also a similar sequel in the form of Mad Dog McCree 2: The Lost Gold. It took a long time for Taito to deliver a genuine sequel to the game that made them famous, but just over a decade later they finally did it with Super Space Invaders. Ignore the 91 tacked onto the end, as this game was definitely released in 1990. I can only assume that they did this for similar reasons to sports games that carry the following year's number. It added both new alien formations and indeed aliens, power-ups, bosses and some hilarious bonus stages. This is a great evolution of an all-time classic. Conceived as a sequel to the hugely popular Afterburner games, G-LOC was a game with a pretty stupendous gimmick. You see, the full version of the game came in a special cabinet called the R360, which, as the name suggests, rotated 360 degrees and moved in perfect harmony with the action on the screen. I was lucky enough to experience this at Sega World in the London Trocadero back in the day, and it truly was an incredible experience. MAME could never hope to replicate that, but the game is still worth looking at anyway. Although the name doesn't give it away, Badlands is actually the final game to be released in Atari's hugely popular Sprint series that originated way back in the mid-70s. As opposed to the semi-realistic Formula 1 setting of the original games, Badlands is actually set in the future in a Mad Max style apocalyptic world where you're literally racing to survive. Ruined cities, barren deserts and industrial complexes play host to the races with the usual range of car upgrades available, including the addition of race-winning weaponry. A really big deal was made of Sega's link up with Michael Jackson back in the day, and his input resulted in two very different games being created, one for Sega's home consoles and this arcade game, which doesn't seem to be anywhere near as well remembered. And that's a shame because Arcade Moonwalker is a really original and incredibly enjoyable multiplayer experience, where you take on the bad guys, rescue the kids, and even transform into a giant robot. The isometric visuals really make this one stand out from the crowd. Commando is an absolutely huge hit for Capcom and one of the titles that really put them on the map, so it's quite surprising that it took the Japanese company 5 years to come up with a proper sequel in the form of Mercs. The core gameplay is very much the same, run up the screen like a one-man army taking out all the enemies whilst you try not to get shot yourself. But amongst the new enhancements on offer on Mercs are power-ups, multi-directional scrolling, destroyable scenery and a very much appreciated 2-player mode. If you love Commando then you're going to absolutely adore Mercs. Alongside Bubble Bobble and Snow Brothers, which featured earlier on this list, Rodland is one of my all-time favourite platform games to originate in the arcades. The gameplay is quite similar to those other games where you are required to clear the screen of enemies to progress, but G-LOC's game has a few really unique features of its own. Firstly, there's the way you attack the enemies with a big glowing wand. Secondly, there is the way you can create your own ladders to reach higher up platforms. Rodland is a must-play multiplayer classic. Given the absolutely huge success of Robotron 2084 from 1982, it's simply incredible that Williams and legendary games designer Eugene Jarvis never followed it up with a sequel. However, in 1990 both parties linked up once again to create Smash TV, which features some remarkably similar twin-stick shooting action. Very reminiscent of the classic Arnie film The Running Man from 3 years previous, you are trying to win some kind of ultra-violent game show as you run around the levels blasting baddies, grabbing prizes and trying to survive until the finale. When talking about classic arcade games that never received home ports, Konami's excellent run-and-gun Aliens is often one of the first titles mentioned. Based on the iconic film that appeared some 4 years earlier, two players can take on the roles of Ripley and Hicks as you explore the alien-infested space station, wiping out everything in your path. There's everything you could possibly hope for here: amazing weaponry, epic boss battles, strategic sections, and of course the final encounter with the Alien Queen herself. Whereas Columns was Sega's own sequel to Tetris, Atari came up with their own follow-up in the form of Klax. Both titles went away from the shape-sorting themes of the Russian game, instead preferring to focus on matching colours, but played quite differently. Klax focuses on dropping titles from a conveyor belt into a pit to match 3 or more in a variety of different ways. The coin-op proved to be a huge success for Atari and still holds the record of having more official home ports than any other arcade game ever. The Super Scaler games were hugely successful for Sega and really showed off the power of arcade games when compared to home consoles. Undoubtedly one of the most impressive of them all is Airbike Cop, a game that plays a little like a futuristic version of Chase HQ as you chase down the criminals on your high-powered hoverbike. The visually advanced nature of this game is probably the main reason that it never made the transition to the home, so the arcade is still the only place to play this highly underrated classic. Whilst it was Technos' Double Dragon that revitalised the beat-em-up genre and brought it back into the public eye, it was Capcom's Final Fight that set the bar that all future games would be judged by, and inspired endless clones like Sega Streets of Rage and Konami's Vendetta. The huge sprites, end-of-level bosses, varied locations and unique characters really helped set the game apart from what came before it, and Final Fight is still regarded by many as being one of the greatest arcade games of all time. The funny thing about Saibu Hatsu's Raiden is that it's a game that did nothing new. It simply took the best bits of other vertically scrolling shoot-em-ups and blended them together to make the ultimate example of its genre, and the game that all similar ones would be judged by going forward. It spawned numerous sequels, a host of home conversions, and the franchise still lives on to this very day. Play the game now and it's barely aged a day. That tells you just how good Raiden was back in 1990. I like to save the best until last, and in my mind Pit Fighter is it. Controversial choice I know, as Atari's groundbreaking fighting game seems to produce some pretty polarising opinions in the present day. But I think people forget what this game actually brought to the arcades, with its pioneering use of digitised graphics, motion capture, sprite scaling and panning, interactive arenas and focus on realism over fantasy. Pit Fighter was originally intended to be a game based on the classic Jean-Claude Van Damme film Kickboxer, and the comparisons are still easy to make. And that rounds up my look at the greatest arcade games of 1990. Are there any others you can think of that should have made the list? Or do you disagree with any of the entries that I did include? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But before I go, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Mitchell Valentino, James Taylor, Neptune, Chaotic, Seth Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Tiago Piera dos Santos Silva and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now, where you can get access to a host of extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.